Ready when you are, sir.
All right, I'm ready.
We're broadcasting.
I'm ready. Are you guys ready? So I see a lot of familiar faces that came to listen to Indoor Quality Hour 1. The rest of you missed out. But we're glad you're here for Hour 2 on mold. I know mold's a popular topic. When I do my trainings, it's always my second presentation. Get it out of the way because everybody's thinking about it, wondering about it, looking at it, breathing it, possibly getting sick. So mold is a important topic for indoor quality, and that's what we're going to talk about for a little bit. I'm using a presentation that's about 90 minutes long, so you're going to have to skip the next. Oh no. I'm just going to go faster through the slides because I really want to focus on some of the instrumentation that I recommend. People are often asking me about testing for mold, and I say you don't need to test for mold, you need to test for water. It's moisture that causes mold. There are some tests for mold, but we typically don't recommend them. They're problematic, and if we have time, I can tell you some war stories about it. But I typically don't recommend spore counts and testing mold to find out what its name is, because after I know its name, I do the same thing as I would before I knew its name, which is get rid of the moisture and clean it up. So got mold? Yeah. So there's a story behind each one, of course. I don't have time to tell all the stories, but this one was a basement in Alaska, that home I visited. And the problem wasn't inside. The problem was outside. And the home was in the middle of a swamp. And they'd taken a half basement, turned it into an apartment, and they turned it into a mold farm. And so what's actually happening here is the moisture is coming up through the floor into the sheetrock and growing up the sheetrock. Now, the fun thing was when you remove that carpet, it was lots and lots of mold. So guess what? That place smelled moldy. We can smell it, which I like all my instruments, but one of the first things I would tell you is use your senses. Our noses are particularly sensitive to mold. However, you got to pay attention to about the first 15 to 30 seconds. After that, it starts diminishing and you're not going to smell it anymore. So that's why people can live in a home with lots of mold and maybe not even realize that they're living with lots of mold because they can't smell it. But you coming in from the outside, you can smell it. So a few topics. So what is mold? It's a living thing. It gives off spores. So I mentioned spore count. That's what we're measuring here, these little babies. And there's a big industry behind spore counts. And you can pay $10,000 and have somebody do a series of testing for you, $10,000 if it's a school. And they're going to give you a report. And then what do? You put the report in the trash, and then you continue on. One school I worked with took that report, and they couldn't understand it. It looked really scary. So they closed down the school and moved all the kids to another school. It cost them like $100,000 to do the move and all that. And then they thought, well, we'll get a second opinion. Now, this is after they'd already made the decision, but they second opinion. So they brought me in. And I found the source of the mold. There was a nice bullfrog farm growing outside. and it was leaking on the inside, and there was one classroom that had a problem. And I told them what they needed to do to fix it. And that would have cost them probably a couple $1,000, and they didn't need to evacuate the school. But, you know, that's the story about mold, is people are often misinformed, don't understand what they're looking at, and all too often make bad decisions, or at least expensive ones that aren't necessary. So, mold. What does it need to grow? Well, all the same things that any living thing needs. We build our homes and buildings out of mold food. That's what I call it. And of course, you know, we need reasonable temperatures and such. So what can we control indoors? We can control the moisture. So that's what I target. The following couple slides are just examples of mold food. It's anything organic, previously living. Moisture sources. Now that one's pretty obvious, right? But man, a lot of moisture sources aren't so obvious. Of course, one of them is you. You guys are all breathing out moisture. I can see it. I mean, I can visualize it. Let's put it that way. I can't see it, but I can visualize it. You're all breathing out moisture, increasing the moisture in this room. That's one of the reasons we need to ventilate. But moisture can often be unseen. And that's probably the more dangerous kind of moisture, is the ones we can't see. But even the ones we can see can create a lot of havoc. In my own home, I had a little tiny leak in a pipe, and it took a while before I even knew it. It started getting all the carpet wet, and didn't know where the moisture was coming from, but plumber came to the rescue. He found it was just a little tiny leak, and of course he fixed it. But I had a couple 100 feet of wet stuff to deal with and to get dry quickly, so I didn't grow any mold. So one of the things that I recommend as far as instruments is a relative humidity meter. And I'll show another slide that tells you about the numbers, but I've given away hundreds, and I'm going to give away 10 today to the most attentive, quiz-ready people in the room. But I recommend that every home have one or more of these. I carry one with my travel stuff. I keep one at work. I keep one at home. But for me, it's because I have respiratory issues, and I want to keep moisture in a certain range, and I'll show you the range. But monitoring moisture, which we cannot see, is a great first step to addressing mold issues. Now, it can also address health issues because, like I said, there's a range that is best and optimal for health, but also for controlling mold. So compared to Arizona, we're pretty moist in here, 47% currently. This time in Arizona, we're down below 16. And the reason I say below 16 is this thing only goes down to 16. So we're probably drier than that. But, you know, you got that big water thing to the west of us here a little bit, and it provides an umbrella of moisture. Do you have an excuse for being late? Car broke down. And your cat ate your homework. Well, I'm glad you're here because yeah, in your room. Okay, good. I know I'm safe harassing these guys because I hang out with them sometimes. But so one of the recommendations I make for instrumentation, and this is for every home, and perhaps even multiple RH meters, so we can keep track of the moisture. And it's the moisture we can't see, which often will create problems. And this is the chart that I use. Up in cold climates, which we're all from the Southwest. Anybody From up north? Oh, we got a couple. All right. So for those of you up north, I might shift it down 10. But for most of the Southwest, I'd recommend 40 to 60. Now, the way to read this chart is the higher the black mark, the more it's a problem. So bacteria, when it's very dry, it's a problem. When it's very wet, it's a problem. And by the way, for different reasons, but it's a problem. But here in the middle, not as much. And then we look at all these others, and here's mold. Another word is fungi. Notice that as it gets more moist, it's more and more a problem. By the time we get up to 100% relative humidity, which, by the way, would be most quite uncomfortable, sauna level maybe. Well, saunas are good. Anyway, we're inevitably going to grow mold. Now, by the way, there's other issues here. Mites, dust mites, very common asthma trigger. You notice that too moist, you get a lot more dust mites. Notice asthma has kind of a low point here. Those of you that work ambient air know about ozone. So anyway, looking at relative humidity, I want it, if I can get it, and in Flagstaff, I actually shoot for 30%, not because I'm cold up there, but because it's really, really dry. And I run a huge humidifier for the house, and I can get it up to 30%, and I'm too lazy to run 2 humidifiers because that's what it would take. But I keep my house 30 or above, and I recommend that range for health, but also thinking about mold. Now, one of the odd things about this is a room, any typical room, will have a variety of microclimates, I call them. So the center of the room, if you're measuring that, might be one reading, but as you get to the corners and edges and windows, cupboards, your levels will change, both temperature and relative humidity, and especially for an outside wall. Now, in a room like this, where we're basically fully enclosed in interior walls, then we're not going to see a lot of variation in temperatures. But in a house where you've got exterior walls, doors, and windows, you're going to see a wide variation. And guess where the mold's going to grow? Yeah, it's going to grow in places like that, or around windows, or around doors. So when you see those kind of patterns developing, now you know why, and then what can you do about it? Well, a variety of things. But, for example, if I'm observing high moisture under my sink, if I don't have small children that I'm going to keep out of there, I might open up those doors. I mean, it's that easy. I can warm that up. One challenging one that I've run into many times is closets. For whatever reason, they tend to put closets on an outside wall, and that outside wall is cool. And then people cram it full of clothes and other things, and that's where the moisture goes. And they don't notice it because the clothes are there. I mean, that's what a closet's for, after all. But that's where I've often seen nice mold farms in a closet. So one of the things to look for mold is water damage, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, again, just because of time. One thing I will mention is, one of the best ways to conduct a building investigation is to talk to people. So another story, again, a second opinion. I'm always the second guy. But anyway, I was going into a building, second opinion on a mold issue problem, and they'd brought in some official mold experts, quote unquote, and they found a little bit of mold, and they told them it was going to cost them $100,000 to fix it. And so they brought me in, And I found the rest of the mold, which was about 90% that the other group had missed altogether. And I found it by talking to people. And somebody told me about a remodel they'd done in an office and how under the carpet for the first couple of feet, there was mold growing. It's like, okay, well, why? So talking to people, I pieced it together, and they had brick walls. It was in Reno, Nevada. And during the winter, those brick walls, they said, well, they sweat. Well, they weren't sweating. They were just, water was condensing and running down the wall into the carpet, saturating the carpet for the first foot and a half, and growing mold and more mold and more mold. But it was all hidden by the carpet. Found a couple ceiling tiles, and they said, oh, there's your mold. But they missed the other 90%, which was every wall, every carpet, mold. So they didn't need to just replace a few ceiling tiles. They needed to replace all the carpet. In fact, not replace, eliminate the carpet. But anyway, of course, you can recognize visible mold. Sometimes the challenge is finding that mold that's behind an interior wall or something like that. But the growth patterns kind of tell you a story about the moisture, what's going on, where that moisture is coming from. And so we don't have time for me to tell all my stories, but I already told you this one, swamp outside. Here's a classic. This is the corner, and the corner of a room, 2 outside walls, is always the coldest spot. There was insulation that was pushed back, so we were growing mold. This one was kind of a fun one. The entire attic was full of mold, and the housing office was remediating it, and they'd torn all the sheetrock off and stuff, and they were getting ready to put it back up. And I said, well, you're going to fix that vent for the bathroom exhaust, right? They looked at me like, huh, what? The bathroom exhaust was exhausting into the attic, and that's where all the moisture was coming from. That's where all the mold was growing that was destroying the house, was because they ventilate into the attic. And by the way, it's a common construction practice from an indoor quality guy. It's a bad one. The assumption is that you'll keep the attic ventilated enough to ventilate the moisture on out. That's a very poor assumption. And you grow mold, and of course, it invades the house as well. So there's a lot of pieces to this, but it's all about moisture, tracking the moisture, making sure you're getting moisture out where it's appropriate, that you're controlling moisture where it's appropriate. This one's kind of fun because it's coming from a kitchen, and you can see the fan here. So the hot, moist air is rising, and it's collecting on the ceiling and growing mold. Most people, they look at that and say, oh, well, you got a leaky roof. Well, no, you don't. It's not the roof. It's a lot of moisture and a cold ceiling. Of course, like I said, interior walls can be a challenge if you get a leak going in an interior wall. Another fun one is this vinyl textured wallpaper. My advice is never use it in the basement because you can grow mold behind it. You can't see it, but everything back there is mold. By the way, when you put on vinyl textured wallpaper, my father-in-law was a paper hanger. You use a wheat paste, which another name for that is mold food. So you're putting up the textured wallpaper with mold food onto probably something else that's mold food, and the mold loves to grow there. So that's one type of hidden mold that can be problematic. But carpets, Mansel has to think about carpets. Now, in order to stay married, I do have carpets in my house. I've been married for 47 years, 48 years, 47. Uh-oh, I better figure it out before I get home. But I think it's pretty close to 48. And my wife likes carpet, but we have a lot of rules about our carpet. But mold loves to grow under carpet. If you go into a space and it smells moldy, you've got mold. The question is, where is it? And if you can't find it in any other places, start looking under the carpet if there is one, because that's probably where it is. I have found that over and over and over again. Of course, mold can affect health, but it's surprising, actually. CDC claims the number is only about 5%. And even if we double that, that's only 10%. So mold is apparently not as much of a health issue as you might think. But let's see. All right, I want to look for mold in a wall. Cueing Chase. Hold on. Hey, well, hold on. I'll just use you as a wall first. Okay, so if I want to find moisture in a wall, there's a couple of different devices I can use, and one of them is this one. And you take the two little prongs and you jab it into the wall. Chase Grimm. And you can measure the moisture. Now, I'm going to have to push a little harder, Chase. Are you all right? Oh, no, don't do that. I don't want any blood. But it'll give you a moisture content, but there's a little bit of a problem there. You got to poke holes. Go ahead. You got to poke holes in a lot of things. So most people don't like me poking holes in their walls, even if I'm looking for their mold. So there's a couple other tools. One of them is this tool. You might have to do it again in a second. This one is a moisture meter, but it's pinless. So they call it non-destructive. Oh, and I managed to bring one that doesn't ring. But those of you that can see, the little dial is maxing out because I have moisture in my hand, right? But you can put this on walls and investigate walls, carpets, etc., looking for moisture. And I've used it in all kinds of different circumstances. But one thing you have to be aware of is there's certain things in walls that might cause it to give a positive reading, and it's not water. It might be metal. So you have to be aware a little bit about construction practices and just be aware. Let's see, like this corner here probably has some metal in it. So no, there we go. I maxed it out. So there's actually a corner piece here that has metal. And so if you know a little bit about construction of walls and stuff, you can anticipate that. But also, okay, as I'm investigating, okay, I've got a high reading here, but I need to investigate, well, why do I have a high reading? And so it's not just as simple as slapping on the wall. You've got to test different spots, look around, be aware of what building construction, also talk to people, etc. So it's a nice tool, but here's my favorite. So IR camera. Let's see if I can get this baby going here. Come on. It makes me to put that on afterwards. Oh, it's on. There we go. Ooh, you guys should see what I'm seeing. I see a lot of hot people out there. All right, well, Chase has been playing with this wall over here, putting stuff on the wall, water, and can you read what he put? No, it's still there, quite distinctive. Come look, Chase. Yeah, I can take a picture of it. No photo library. Oh, no. Oh, well. I gotta change the setting, which I'm not going to take the time to do, but those of you can see it. Are you going to take a picture of it, show people? Yeah, there you go. But and over here I got a smiley face. So what I'm measuring is temperature differences. I'm not measuring moisture. This is an important distinction to understand how to use IR cameras, but I'm measuring moisture temperature differences. And the reason I can measure temperature difference is because moisture, as it evaporates, absorbs heat. And so the stuff that he's put on the wall, the water that he's put on the wall, as it evaporates, it cools it just a little bit. And my IR camera is sensitive enough to detect that. So I use all these tools in combination as I'm conducting an investigation, looking for the moisture. Of course, one thing to remember is that moisture can be seasonal. It can be based on rainfall. It can be based on, the crazy one is people irrigating their walls. But these tools can help me find that moisture. And of course, the moisture corresponds to possible mold growth, because that's what, anytime you have moisture with mold food, then you can get mold growth. So those are some of the instruments I use. Just some examples of the pinless one. There's hundreds of different vendors that'll sell it to you. To some degree, keep in mind that as you spend more, you might get more. On the other hand, if you're only using it a couple times a year, you don't want to blow your whole budget on one instrument. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, but lots of choices. Now, I didn't get a picture of it on here, but my friends at Choctaw, they have one that's both a non-destructive moisture and an IR camera all integrated into one instrument. And that's super convenient. I like it. I just haven't found the money to buy me one yet, because I've spent all my money on all these others. But and there's lots of different kinds of IR cameras. Now, the one I'm using here is one of the cheaper versions. This isn't the cheapest. I think I paid like $350 for it a few years ago. I think there's ones down to less than 200, and then they go on up from there. As you get into these, you could be looking at a few $1,000s. So, what features are important to you and how often you're going to use it. But it's a great tool for looking for mold, but also for other things too. It's actually great for looking at energy conservation, because you can look for heat leaks in your building. So it has multiple uses, but another instrument. So as far as the health impacts, like I was telling you earlier, CDC says that you might not have any health impacts, or you could be highly allergic to the mold and have extreme impacts. And then the mold does produce toxins. They're typically what we call semi-volatiles, which means they won't get a whole lot in the air, but when you touch them, and then especially if you touch them and then your face and things, you could be transferring these toxins. Anybody identify a toxin that most of you probably used in your lifetime? A mold toxin? Yeah. So, mold toxins aren't all bad, but they're basically designed to fight each other, but we're kind of, victims as well sometimes. The health symptoms typically overlap with any kind of illness, so it can be really hard to tease out. I don't typically use health symptoms to help me with my mold investigations, but it might prompt me to do a mold investigation if somebody tells me, like, man, when I go home, I have all these symptoms. When I get out, I don't. And I tell them, well, just get out. No. Then we go look and see if we could identify the cause. So different levels. There is such a thing as infectious mold. And in fact, it seems to be growing in prevalence. And this is typically immune compromised individuals, but the mold will actually grow in your lungs, and it's really tough to treat. Just like with other issues in air quality, the most vulnerable are classic, the young, the elders, the immune compromised, the ones that have allergies, etc. So how do we prevent mold? We've been talking about it right along, but we keep things clean and uncluttered, dry and well ventilated. Make sure our exhaust fans are actually exhausting the outside. Watch the humidity. Source ventilation. That's a biggie. One family I worked with in Idaho that had been removed from their house because of mold, and they'd gotten mitigated, but they were put back in the house and said, if you grow mold again, you're out of housing. And they couldn't afford it. But the housing office didn't tell them how to avoid growing mold. They just said, don't do it. Well, believe me, that's not very helpful. But it turned out in their case that the exhaust fan in the bathroom wasn't working properly. Housing didn't catch it either. And they had 2 teenage sons that took showers like my teenager did, like hours. And all that moisture got dumped into the house. They were heating the house with a wood stove, which is fine, but it only heats the main room. It didn't heat the back bedrooms. And all the moisture was going to the back bedrooms and to the closets specifically. But it was also growing behind furniture, behind bookcases, all those kind of things. And they didn't understand any of that. They didn't have a moisture meter. And they were just sitting in their house kind of in a semi-panic, wondering when they were going to get kicked out. But I got to come to the rescue. And I gave them some RH meters, and we moved furniture away from the walls, and we talked about circulating the warm air in the house using fans and other things. So, but it's really important to get moisture out of the house. Same thing with cooking. This flame is giving off a lot of moisture as well as any cooking from boiling water and stuff. But the main combustion products from a flame are carbon dioxide and water. So anytime you burn something like on a stove, you're producing a lot of water. I mentioned things like keeping furniture from outside walls. So the moisture gets trapped back there, but the heat doesn't get back there. And so it becomes a cool spot, and that's where the mold grows. Now, for some people, it's just like it's magic. They don't know why the mold's growing behind their couch. They just know it is. But they need to learn, okay, if we move that furniture 6 inches away from the wall, all of a sudden the mold's going to stop growing. It's kind of like magic. I like doing magic tricks. And teaching people, it helps them take care of their homes. Same thing with hanging blankets. Sometimes people like to hang blankets on their window because it keeps the heat in, they think. It also keeps the moisture in. I call them mold farms. If you must do that, then take the blanket off the window every day, dry it out, dry out the windowsill, and you can probably avoid growing mold, but you got to dry it out daily. Poor drainage. So I mentioned the one house, big swamp outside the house, causing mold inside the house. I can think of dozens of cases of where the mold problem starts outside, something outside. Water flows around the house, the way the drainage is. I remember doing a library. In fact, don't we have somebody here from Camp Verde? I did in the last presentation. I guess she left. Anyway, so now I can tell a story about her. I was doing a tribal building in Camp Verde, and the library had a bunch of issues. It smelled like mold. I knew there was mold. I just had to find it. Well, it was in the carpet, but where was all that water coming from? Well, it turned out it was coming on the outside. So the way the drainage was, and if you're not from Camp Verde doesn't get a huge amount of water, rain. But where the drainage was, it drained partly right into and through the wall and into the library, into the carpet where you couldn't see it. And we had a big patch of mold growth, and they couldn't find it. So they brought in the cavalry to find it for them. I'm a pretty good mold sniffer. But one of the things you might consider is mold resistant materials in your different rooms, like your bathroom and stuff. Now, here's one that's a biggie. And how much time do we have left? We still got a few minutes, right? I guess I've been talking fast enough. But when I talk to tribal housing offices, do we have anybody here from a tribal housing office? It's okay. We won't torture you or anything. Nobody? That's too bad. But when we talk about mold in a tribal setting, there's a lot of this going on. Point back to me. Yeah. All right. The tribal housing points to them, just to the household, and says it's their problem. They point at the housing and say it's your problem, and nothing gets done. Well, the truth of the matter is, can you pick that up for me? I'll kick it over to you. Is it's everybody's problem. Everybody has a role. And so I recommend figuring it out. What's the role? And the people living in houses need some education, need to understand how to operate their house, how to watch for mold, how to avoid growing it. But at some point, they might need some support from the housing department to take care of issues. Of course, if you're a homeowner, you're on your own. You got to figure it out. Go buy your own plumber or whatever. But if you're in tribal housing, if you have a pipe that's split like I did, a little tiny leak, then that might be a tribal housing thing. But if it's temperature control and exhaust fan use and a long list of other things, then that's the occupant. And so it takes everybody working together, and including environmental folks, to come and do assessments and some of that teaching to address these issues. And quit pointing the fingers. Just get down to work and get it done. All right. I know that's tough to do because I've worked with tribal housing from all over the nation. And sometimes they're not real happy when us environmental guys come and try to tell them what to do. And I don't try to tell them what to do. I just offer them advice and support. But it can be a challenge. And by the way, new opportunities to work with your tribal housing office. There'll be a presentation this afternoon on radon. And HUD implemented a new policy on radon. And it's got me jazzed. And I want to share the excitement with any of you that might be interested in that issue. So one of the things is our batteries, nope, they're still here. Somebody's waving at me. Oh, okay. I think the battery's starting to fade out. They warned me that might happen. I don't know, do you have spare batteries to fix it or? Testing. Okay, that's better. When you get a mold complaint, there's probably some other things going on. And again, I'm just telling this from experience. I remember one home in Montana that invited me in because granddaughter had been to ER 3 times in the last month. And granddaughter did have some mold growing in her bedroom. But by the time I completed the investigation, I gave them a list of 10 things. Mold was number 9. So there was 8 more things that I thought might be more hazardous to that young lady's lungs than the mold. And by the way, the mold was caused from water outside the house. So They were trying to do all kinds of things inside. None of it was working. And I took them outside, and they had a puddle of water sitting there, and it was slowly leaking into the house. But the young lady's bedroom had a couple of those oil sense fragrance things going on. I walked into that room, and man, my lungs collapsed almost instantly because of not the mold, but because of all the fragrances that they were using to cover up the mold. So I'm sure you've heard the expression, the cover up is sometimes worse than the crime, right? Yeah, that happens in politics a lot. Well, it happens with mold too. Sometimes the cover up is worse than the original mold. And that was definitely true, in my opinion, in that case, with the young lady going to ER. So we got rid of the so-called air fresheners, and a long list of other things. And when I checked back in with the family a month later, granddaughter hadn't been to ER for a while. So that was good news. But it all started out as a mold complaint. So, my suggestion to any of you that are doing mold assessments, so-called, don't ignore everything else going on because the real health issues could be something else. And I'm going to skip through that. So I did talk about this a little bit, about sampling. I did say there's two different kinds of sampling that can be done for mold. One is just to identify the type of mold. The other is to do what's called a spore count, which can be an indicator of mold. Not a very reliable one, not a very accurate one, not a very useful one, but it can be an indicator. And I don't recommend any of those unless you have a lawyer or a doctor involved. Now, the lawyers, they just like stuff, give them as many papers as they can. So test away, stack up the papers. It'll cost you some money, though. And sometimes doctors can find it useful to know a little bit more, especially the type of mold. So, if you have doctors or lawyers involved, sure, sample away, spend your money, get your test results. Otherwise, why don't we just fix the problem? So spend our money on fixing the problem, find the moisture, get rid of the moisture, do the cleanup, all of which does not require spore counts. It does not require knowing what kind of mold you have. So mold sampling becomes an additional expense and and can actually cause problems because there's really not an interpretation for spore counts that's very effective. And Chase did some carpet stomping earlier. Part of what we saw with particles coming up were probably mold spores. I mean, there's mold spores in this room. And when Chase stomps on the carpet, you're going to get mold spores. So I can change the count just by stepping across the carpet. That's why taking mold spore counts is so unreliable, is because all kinds of things can affect what you measure. So it just becomes a difficult measure, and there's no standards or guidelines anyway. So cleanup, and this is occupant level. So, if you got a big problem, tribal housing or a contractor is called for, and various measures. But I'm interested in preventing the problem before it becomes too big, and the occupant taking it. I can't read your sign. All right. I could see the orange back there. All right. 5 minutes. 5 minutes? Oh, okay. 10-minute break. All right. You don't need a break, do you? No, I didn't think so. All right. So let's go through these quickly. But if you can do a cleanup, absolutely the first thing to do is take care of that moisture. If you do a cleanup and you don't deal with the moisture, guess what? You're going to be doing a cleanup again in a few weeks, and then a few weeks after that. You got to address the moisture. Now, how many of you confess? How many of you think that treating mold requires bleach? It's okay. You can raise your hand. We won't laugh at you too much. No. So I'm a chemist, and I can tell you that bleach is a strong respiratory irritant. However, it doesn't do a whole lot for mold. It doesn't kill the mold spores. And I had this one guy doing a daycare. Do I have time to tell another story? Anyway, he's doing a daycare, and he was squirting his mold water, and he said the mold just kept growing. In fact, it got worse. Well, guess what? The bleach wasn't very effective, and he was actually adding more moisture by spraying it with his bleach water. We don't recommend bleach. What we recommend is removal. So I have a mold cleanup kit here. It does not have any bleach in it. Could you open that? So no bleach, but I do want to protect your lungs with an N95. I want to protect your hands with some gloves. Squeegees can help you manage water. And the most useful tool here is the brush and some elbow grease and some hot soapy water. You want to remove the mold. I don't care if you kill it. I mean, you just want to get rid of it. You want to remove it. And so, in fact, attempting to kill it, they theorize actually causes the spores to be cast off, increasing risk. So don't use bleach. Typically, what we recommend is if it's less than 10 square feet of mold growth, then that can be an occupant level. Now, of course, there'll be some occupants that might not be appropriate. Your senior center, where you've got seniors, you might not expect them to clean up mold. Maybe you're going to have someone help them out. But some guidelines are definitely appropriate. 10 square feet, if you want to do it 8 square feet, that's fine. It's pretty arbitrary, but it's basically saying a small patch of mold is appropriate for an occupant to clean up. When you start getting to bigger patches, then not so much. And you need to do more and more protection. I don't think I have slides for more and more. Oh, maybe I do. Nope. But as you get into the larger cleanups, that's where you need somebody who's either trained. So that could be somebody in the tribal housing office that's trained, or let a contractor come and deal with it. I think that's enough, especially since you'll shoot me if I keep talking. But any questions about your mold? Did you learn something about how to help you manage your mold? You know how to grow it better now? Yeah, just lots of moisture, right? Yes.
Or if you can't put your furniture directly on the wall, like, is there something to mitigate? Because, like, that's weird.
Weird.
Furniture not against the wall. I feel like
It's pretty. It might be weird, but it doesn't. It helps you not grow mold. So, if it's an interior wall, then you're okay. So it's the outside walls, and it's climate dependent. So in Flagstaff, I don't have much of an issue, but northern California, northern Idaho, it's an issue. So actually to answer your question, if your walls of your house are properly insulated, then it won't be an issue. The problem is we don't insulate our homes well enough. So if we insulated our homes better, then it wouldn't be an issue. So you just need to buy a house or have someone come in and put another 8 inches of insulation on the wall and you'll be okay.
Speaking of insulation, there's the closed cell and open cell foam that goes in on that wall. You seeing any issues with that as far